On October 15th, 1987, Sarah Mitchell kissed her husband for the last time. But what she didn't know was that this moment of love would become the beginning of 36 years of nightmare. It was a golden Tuesday autumn morning in Millbrook, a small town in the countryside where tree leaves painted the streets red and yellow. The kind of place where neighbors still left their doors unlocked, where everyone knew everyone by their first name, where the most serious crime in the last 10 years had been the theft of a bicycle, an American paradise that was about to have its innocence shattered forever. Sarah Mitchell, 28 years old, had the most radiant smile David had ever seen in his entire life. Brown hair that shimmered like honey in the morning sun, emerald green eyes that danced when she laughed in that contagious way. 3 years of marriage, and they still behaved like teenage sweethearts, still dreamed of filling that yellow 3-bedroom house with the sound of children playing in the backyard. That Tuesday morning, Sarah prepared pancakes as she did every week. The smell of cinnamon and vanilla filled the cozy kitchen while David adjusted his navy blue tie for another day at the town's accounting office. Their morning routine was sacred, a ritual of love they had repeated for 3 years. As always, she fixed his tie affectionately, smoothing the fabric with delicate fingers. As always, he kissed her forehead and said, "I love you, beautiful nurse." "I love you more, boring accountant," she replied, laughing in that way that made his heart race and the world's worries disappear. But there was something different about that morning. Something that David would only be able to identify years later, when every detail of that day became sacred in his memory. Something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Sarah was more affectionate than normal, more attentive, more intense, as if she were recording every second of that moment, as if she knew it would be special. She held his face between her hands for a few seconds longer. She looked into his eyes with an intensity that made him smile, confused. "Everything okay, love?" he asked. "Everything perfect," she replied, but there was a strange note in her voice. "Just, I love you so much, David Mitchell." At 2:30 in the afternoon, the phone rang at David's office. It was Sarah. Her voice danced through the telephone line as it always did when she was excited. "Love, I'm going to do some shopping at Millbrook Shopping. I need to pick up some things for dinner, and maybe a little surprise for you." He could hear the smile in her voice. "I love you. See you at 6 for dinner, okay? I'm going to make that chicken you love." "All right, darling. Drive carefully. It's starting to rain." David looked through the office window, watching the first drops hitting the glass. "I love you too. Always carefully, always with love," she said, a phrase they had created in their first year of marriage. Those were the last words David Mitchell would hear from his wife. At 3:15 in the afternoon, the security cameras at Millbrook Shopping captured Sarah entering through the main entrance. The grainy black and white image showed her wearing a light blue dress with small white flowers, the same one David had complimented that morning, saying it enhanced her green eyes. She carried her favorite brown leather purse, the one she had received from David on their second wedding anniversary. And on her left ring finger, shining even in the low-quality recording, was the 18-karat gold wedding ring that David had chosen with such care 3 years before, engraved with the words, "David and Sarah, forever." The ring had cost David 3 months' salary. He had worked overtime, had saved every penny, because he wanted something special, something that would last forever. The jeweler had suggested something simpler, cheaper, but David was inflexible. It has to last a lifetime, he had said. It has to be perfect. And it was perfect. Sarah never took it off her finger. Not to wash dishes, not to shower, not to sleep. It was part of her. That rainy October afternoon, Sarah walked through the shopping center like any person doing everyday shopping. Like any ordinary afternoon of a happy life, not knowing that each step was taking her closer to a terrible destiny. But at 7:30 in the evening, when David arrived home carrying flowers he had bought for Sarah on the way, the table was empty. The pots, cold. The chicken she had promised to cook was still raw in the refrigerator. Sarah wasn't there. She must have run into some friend at the shopping center, he thought, trying to push away the worry that was beginning to gnaw at his stomach. She'll arrive soon, laughing and telling gossip. At 8 o'clock, David called Sarah's best friend, Jennifer. "No, I didn't see her. Today," Jennifer said. "She didn't mention anything about going out besides shopping." At 9 o'clock, worry turned into fear. David called all their friends, all their relatives, all of Sarah's co-workers. No one had spoken with her. At 10 o'clock, he was walking around the empty house, looking at the clock every minute, his heart beating faster and faster. At 11 o'clock, David was driving through Millbrook streets under the light rain, looking for Sarah's blue Honda Civic, his hands trembling on the steering wheel. At midnight, with tears in his eyes and his voice breaking, he called the police. Emergency Central. My wife has disappeared. She went out to do shopping this afternoon and didn't come home." And that's how the nightmare that would last 36 years began. Sarah's car was found in the shopping center parking lot at 6 o'clock the next morning, under the gray light of a cloudy dawn. Engine cold for hours. Keys in the ignition, swaying slightly in the wind. Purse intact on the passenger seat. With wallet, money, credit cards, documents, everything exactly in place, as if she had simply evaporated. Detective Jim Crawford, a 45-year-old man with a graying mustache and 20 years of experience investigating everything from chicken theft to homicides, had never seen anything like it. "It's as if she was taken by the air," he told David that first terrible morning, his voice loaded with genuine perplexity. "It doesn't make any sense at all." The security cameras showed Sarah entering the shopping center at 3:15, but never leaving. It was impossible. Physically impossible. There were only 2 main exits, and both had perfectly functioning cameras. But what really disturbed Crawford were the small details that didn't fit. Sarah's keys were in the ignition, but the car was locked from the inside. How had she locked the car and left the keys behind? Her purse was intact, but the lipstick was missing. Sarah always carried lipstick. It was an obsession of hers. Why had only the lipstick disappeared? And even stranger, there were footprints in the parking lot mud that led from Sarah's car to the shopping center entrance. But there were no footprints back. It was as if Sarah Mitchell had entered Millbrook shopping and simply ceased to exist. What no one knew was that Sarah's wedding ring would become the key to solving one of the most puzzling disappearances of recent decades. What they didn't know was that the answer was hidden just a few meters away, buried under tons of concrete and earth, waiting 36 long years to finally reveal its deadly secrets. And what they definitely couldn't imagine was that when the truth finally emerged, it would be more shocking and more terrible than anyone in Millbrook could ever conceive. The investigation into Sarah Mitchell's disappearance began with absolute certainty and ended with dozens of questions that made no sense at all. Detective Jim Crawford arrived at Millbrook Shopping at 7 o'clock on the morning of October 16th, still carrying the smell of strong coffee, and the naive hope that this would be a simple case. Maybe Sarah had fainted. Maybe she had met an acquaintance and lost track of time. Maybe she had decided to spend the night at a friend's house without warning. In 20 years of police career, Crawford had seen everything. Husbands who faked disappearances to escape debts. Wives who simulated kidnapping to run away with lovers. People who simply decided to start a new life in another state. But he had never seen anything like this. The first evidence seemed absolutely normal. Sarah's blue Honda Civic was parked in space 47, Sector B, exactly where the cameras showed her leaving the car at 3:15 the previous afternoon. Keys in the ignition, doors unlocked. No sign of violence. No sign of struggle. No sign of anything abnormal. Let's track her. Movements inside the shopping center, Crawford told his team of 4 investigators. It seemed obvious. It seemed simple. It seemed routine. They had no idea of the impossible puzzle they were about to face. The security cameras told a story that defied all logic. 3:15. Sarah enters through the shopping center's main door, walking normally. Her steps are firm, confident. She smiles at a small child who runs past, chased by her mother. A typical Sarah gesture. Always kind with children. 3:18. She stops at Martinez jewelry store window, observes some engagement rings for exactly 2 minutes and 15 seconds. The cameras capture her unconsciously touching her own wedding ring while observing the jewelry. 3:21. Enters Brooks Pharmacy. The pharmacist, Mr. Jose Santos, remembered her perfectly. She bought vitamin C and a recipe magazine, he told Crawford. She was normal, smiling, commented that she was cooking something special for her husband. 3:24. Exits the pharmacy carrying a small white bag. Walks toward the corridor that leads to the back of the shopping center. The cameras capture her checking her watch. She seems slightly hurried. 3:25. Sarah turns left in the back corridor. And then nothing. Simply nothing. The back cameras didn't show Sarah leaving. The main entrance cameras didn't show her returning. The side exit cameras registered no movement at all. It was as if she had simply dissolved into thin air. "This is physically impossible," Crawford murmured, playing the tape for the 30th time. His eyes were red from fatigue, but he kept watching, looking for a detail he had missed, an angle he hadn't considered. She has to be somewhere. People don't disappear like this. But Sarah had disappeared like this. The investigation team searched every square inch of the shopping center, every store, every bathroom, every storage room, every administrative office. They interrogated all 47 employees who were working that afternoon. They checked every emergency exit, every window, every ventilation opening. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. No one had seen Sarah after 3:24. Frank Henderson, the shopping center manager, was paler than paper. His hands trembled as he showed the building plans to Crawford. "Detective, I guarantee on my reputation that all cameras were working perfectly. We do maintenance every week. We have backup systems. It's technically impossible for someone to leave without being detected." But Sarah had achieved the impossible. On the second day of investigation, Crawford made a decision that would change everything. He brought in the tracking dogs. Rex, a 6-year-old German shepherd specialized in search and rescue, arrived at 8 o'clock in the morning with his trainer, Sergeant Mike Torres. Rex had found missing people in snowy mountains, in dense forests, in buildings collapsed after earthquakes. If there was a human trail to follow, Rex would find it. His record was impeccable. 127 people found in 8 years of service. They started at Sarah's car. Rex sniffed the driver's seat, the steering wheel, her purse. His brown eyes lit up with that sharp intelligence that only working dogs possess. He had captured Sarah Mitchell's unique scent. He barked once, the standardized signal that he was ready to begin the search. The dog followed the trail, through the shopping center's main entrance, through the main corridor, past Martinez jewelry store where Sarah had stopped, past Brooks Pharmacy where she had bought vitamins. The trail was clear. It was fresh, even after 24 hours. Rex was confident, his tail wagging slightly, a sign that the trail was strong. He followed the same path that the cameras had recorded, main corridor, left turn, direction to the back of the shopping center. But then, at the door that led to the back patio, something extraordinary happened, something that Torres had never witnessed in his career. Rex stopped abruptly. He sniffed the ground in increasingly tight circles, sniffed the air with desperate intensity, returned to the door, sniffed again. His movements became agitated, confused. He howled softly, a sound of frustration and perplexity that Torres had never heard from Rex before. "What's happening with him?" asked Crawford, observing the dog's anomalous behavior. Torres shook his head, genuinely perplexed. The trail simply stopped. It's as if the person had disappeared exactly at this point. Rex is trying to understand where the trail went, but there is no trail. They brought another dog, a bloodhound named Duke, specialist in old trails. Then they brought Bella, a Belgian shepherd with a reputation for never losing a trail. All 3 dogs had exactly the same reaction. Sarah Mitchell's trail led to the back door of the shopping center, and then disappeared completely. There was no continuation, no direction, nothing. In 15 years training search dogs, Torres told Crawford that afternoon, his voice loaded with incredulity, "I've never seen anything remotely similar to this. It's as if the person had flown from there, or had simply ceased to exist. But people don't fly, and people don't cease to exist." The back area of the shopping center was a small rectangular concrete patio, surrounded by a 2-meter-high wire fence. There was only one entrance and exit, the same door through which Sarah would have entered. There were no other accesses, no openings in the fence. Absolutely no way to leave there without going through the main door. Crawford examined every inch of the fence. There were no footprints in the mud near the wire. There were no fabric fibers caught on the wires. There were no climbing marks. No signs that anyone had climbed or cut the fence. "It's physically impossible," Crawford murmured, for the 100th time, lighting his 8th cigarette of the day. "She entered through this door, but didn't exit through it. There's no other exit. There's no way to climb the fence without leaving traces. So where the hell is she?" The answer was buried just 50 meters from there, but would come to light only 36 years later. For 5 intensive weeks, the investigation completely consumed the town of Millbrook. 500 volunteers searched every forest, every lake, every abandoned barn, every empty house within a radius of 100 kilometers. National Guard helicopters flew over the region for days. Specialized divers explored all bodies of water, including the river that passed 15 kilometers from town. David Mitchell offered a $50,000 reward, a fortune for a small town in 1987. The police phone rang 24 hours a day with false leads, impossible sightings, conspiracy theories from well-intentioned but misguided people. One woman swore she had seen Sarah in Las Vegas. A truck driver was sure he had seen her hitchhiking on the interstate highway. 3 different people called saying that Sarah was hiding at relatives' homes in other states. All leads were checked meticulously. All led to nothing. "It's the most bizarre and frustrating case of my career," Crawford admitted to reporters in the 5th week of investigation. Sarah Mitchell entered that shopping center on an ordinary October Fati afternoon and simply disappeared, as if she had been taken by the air by supernatural forces. What they didn't know was that Sarah was closer than they ever imagined, just a few meters from the place where the dogs had lost the trail. What they didn't know was that, while they searched in distant forests and deep lakes, the answer was buried under their own feet. And what they definitely didn't know was that a simple gold ring would guard the secret for 36 long years, until the Earth itself, moved by modern machines, decided to reveal the truth about what really happened to Sarah Mitchell that terrible October afternoon. The truth that would emerge would be more shocking, more disturbing, and closer to home than anyone in Millbrook could ever imagine. 36 years is enough time for a town to forget a mystery, for old scars to heal, for life to move forward and bury the past. But David Mitchell never forgot, never healed, never moved forward. In 2023, at 64 years old, David still lived in the same yellow house where he had shared 3 perfect years with Sarah. His hair now completely gray, deep wrinkles marking decades of sadness and tireless search. But his green eyes still shone with the same fierce determination of the young accountant who had refused to accept that his wife had simply disappeared without explanation. The house remained exactly as Sarah had left it, her closet untouched, her beauty products still organized on the dresser, her favorite coffee mug washed and stored in the cabinet, waiting. Every Tuesday, without exception for 36 years, David visited Millbrook's municipal cemetery. He always brought fresh flowers, always the same white roses that Sarah loved, to a grave that had no body, only a white marble headstone that he had ordered made in 1990. Sarah Mitchell, beloved wife, your love lives forever. 1959 to 1987. He had put the death date as the day of disappearance, but deep in his heart, he had never really accepted that she was dead. He never married again, never dated seriously, never even considered the possibility. How could he? Sarah was still there, in every photo, in every memory, in every corner of that house they had planned to fill with children. Do you still believe she's alive somewhere? Well-intentioned friends asked over the years, with that careful tone people use. When talking about obsessions, they consider unhealthy. David always answered the same thing, with the same unwavering conviction. I believe that one day I'll know the truth about what happened to her. I believe Sarah deserves justice, and I believe our love was too strong to simply disappear without answers. This Tuesday, September 12, 2023, would be different from all the other Tuesdays of the last 36 years. The morning dawned gray and heavy in Millbrook, with that kind of loaded sky that promises storm. David was sitting at the kitchen table, drinking black coffee in the same mug he had used for decades, looking through the window at the garden that Sarah had planted and that he maintained meticulously cared for like a sanctuary. It was 9:23 when his phone rang. It was a local number he didn't recognize. "Mr. Mitchell, this is Roberto Silva from Horizonte Construction Company. Could you come to Millbrook shopping? We..." found something that, well, I think you need to see it personally." David's heart practically stopped. After 36 years of absolute silence, was there still something to find? "What did you find?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Mr. Mitchell, I prefer not to discuss this over the phone. Please, can you come here? It's about your wife." 25 minutes later, David was parking in the same place where Sarah's Honda Civic had been found 3.5 decades ago. But everything was unrecognizably different. The shopping center had closed definitively in 2019. The abandoned stores, the dirty and cracked windows, vegetation growing wildly through the concrete cracks. And behind the shopping center, where before there had only been a fenced concrete patio and vacant land, now rose the skeleton of modern construction. A luxury residential complex was being built on the land, with glass and steel towers that seemed completely out of place in that small countryside town. Roberto Silva, a 40-year-old man with a yellow helmet and mud-covered boots, ran to meet David as soon as he saw him. His hands were visibly trembling, and there was something in his eyes, a mixture of excitement and horror that made David's stomach turn. "Mr. Mitchell, I read about your wife's case in the local newspaper archives when our company bought this land for development," Silva said quickly, the words coming out in nervous bursts. "When we started excavating for the new building's foundations, we found something buried in the subsoil." They walked to a yellow excavator stopped next to a deep rectangular hole. Workers clustered around, whispering among themselves with that reverent tone people use near places of death. The smell of wet earth, oxidized metal, and something else, something organic and ancient, filled the air. "We were removing an old plumbing system," Silva explained, pointing to pieces of PVC pipe scattered beside the excavation. "The system dated from the 80s. It was right here, approximately 50 meters from the back of the old shopping center. When our machine broke the main pipe, something shone in the earth that came out with it." David followed Silva's gaze to a small wooden table set up beside the excavation. On top of the table, protected by transparent plastic like a sacred relic, was an object that made the world stop spinning. A gold ring. Even after 36 years buried in darkness, even covered by a thin layer of dark earth, and organic debris, even discolored by time, David immediately recognized every detail. The engraving was still legible. David and Sarah, forever. It was the ring he had chosen with so much love. The ring that had cost 3 months' salary. The ring that Sarah never took off her finger, not even to sleep. "My God," he whispered, his legs failing. Roberto supported him by the shoulders. "There's more, Mr. Mitchell. Much more." With trembling legs, David approached the edge of the excavation. In the hole approximately 3 meters deep, partially exposed by the removed earth, he could see fragments he immediately recognized. Pieces of faded blue fabric, the same tone as the dress with white flowers that Sarah wore on the last day. Small bones whitened by the passage of time. A brown leather purse almost completely deteriorated, but still recognizable. Brown leather shoes he remembered seeing 1,000 times on. His wife's delicate feet. And there, among the debris of 3.5 decades, the mortal remains of the woman he had loved, had searched for, had waited for 36 long years. After more than 3 decades of mystery, Sarah had been found. How did she get here?" David asked, his voice breaking in sobs he had suppressed for decades. Roberto shook his head, clearly disturbed. "We don't know, sir, but there's something very strange about the situation. The pipe system that, was installed over her, was put in place in November 1987, several weeks after your wife disappeared. David's mind processed this information slowly, as if emerging from a long and confused dream. The plumbing system had been installed after Sarah's disappearance, which meant that someone had buried her there and then had covered the place with infrastructure work to permanently hide the crime. Someone had planned this meticulously. In less than 2 hours, the area was completely isolated by police. Detective Lisa Chen, a 45-year-old Asian woman who had taken the position after Crawford's retirement in 2010, arrived with a complete team of criminal forensics and forensic archaeologists. "Mr. Mitchell," she said gently, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder, "I know this must be extremely difficult after so many years without answers. But we can finally begin to discover what really happened to Sarah." The careful and methodical excavation revealed a scene that completely changed the perspective of the case. Sarah hadn't simply disappeared or fled to start a new life. She had been brutally murdered and buried in a shallow grave dug specifically to hide her body. Fibers of nylon rope were found still wrapped around the neck bones, indicating strangulation. Fragments of industrial adhesive tape still stuck to the wrist bones showed that she had been tied up. And most importantly, human DNA had been preserved in the gold ring that Sarah had never been able to remove from her finger. The ring was partially protected from total decomposition by being buried inside the PVC pipe, explained the criminal expert, Dr. Amanda Torres, a forensic specialist with 20 years of experience. The partially anaerobic environment preserved genetic material from both the victim and, at least, one other person. DNA from another person. After 36 years of absolute mystery, they finally had a solid and scientific clue about Sarah Mitchell's killer. The ring was literally like a silent witness, Chen told David that afternoon, as they watched the excavation continue under powerful spotlights. It carried a message from the dead. A message that waited patiently for decades to be heard and understood. The complete DNA analysis was sent to the State Criminal Laboratory with absolute maximum priority. In 72 hours, they would have definitive answers. David spent those 3 nights without sleeping, sitting on the porch of the yellow house, looking toward the place where Sarah had spent 36 years waiting to be found. Tears constantly rolled down his face, but they were complex tears. Of sadness for the confirmation of death, of relief for finally knowing the truth, of anger for lost time, and of hope that there would finally be justice. "I found you, my love," he whispered to the stars on the 3rd night. "I solemnly promise you that whoever did this to you will pay for what they did. I promise you that you will have justice." He had no idea how this promise would come true in less than a week. Because the truth that would emerge from the DNA analysis found in Sarah's ring would be more shocking and disturbing than anyone in Millbrook could imagine. The killer wasn't a dangerous stranger who had passed through town. Wasn't a criminal from outside. Wasn't someone unknown. It was someone Sarah knew personally. Someone she had trusted. Someone who was still alive, still lived in Millbrook, and still walked freely through the same streets where they had committed murder. And in less than a week, that someone would discover that, after 36 years, believing they had committed the perfect crime, a simple gold ring was about to destroy their life and expose their darkest secrets forever. David's phone rang at 6:32 on the morning of September 18, 2023. He had been awake for hours, sitting at the EV Beats kitchen table, staring fixedly at a wedding photo of Sarah that he always kept nearby. 3 cups of coffee had already cooled without being touched. "Mr. Mitchell, this is Detective Chen. We have a perfect match on the DNA. I need you to come to the station immediately. We arrested your wife's killer." David dropped the coffee cup on the kitchen floor. The sound of porcelain shattering echoed through the empty house like a gunshot. After 36 years, 36 long years of unanswered questions, of sleepless nights, of alternating hope and despair, finally the time for truth had arrived. "Who?" he managed to ask, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Michael Reeves, a 71-year-old man who lived in Millbrook his whole life. Mr. Mitchell, he confessed everything." An hour later, David was sitting in the observation room of Millbrook Police Station, looking through a mirrored glass at an elderly man handcuffed to a metal table in the interrogation room. Michael Reeves. The name meant absolutely nothing to David initially, until Detective Chen opened the case file and began explaining the terrible connection that had destroyed his life 36 years ago. Michael Reeves worked for Henderson Construction Company from 1985 to 1992, she said, pointing to a black-and-white archival photo. He was one of the main people responsible for installing the sanitation system in Millbrook's commercial area, specifically including the plumbing that was placed exactly over your wife's body in November 1987. David studied the man's face through the glass. Sparse and disheveled gray hair, thick glasses with scratched lenses, trembling hands stained by age, simple and worn clothes. He looked like a harmless grandfather who could be feeding pigeons in the park. Not a killer who had destroyed his life and stolen the love of his existence. "How did you find him after so long?" David asked. "The DNA from the ring was entered into the National Criminal Identification System. Reeves was arrested for domestic violence against his ex-wife in 2019. His DNA was collected and stored in the database. When we ran the genetic profile comparison, perfect match with the material found on Sarah's ring." Chen turned several pages of the technical report. "We confronted him yesterday at 11 in the evening at his house. Initially, he denied everything, but when we showed him the DNA results and explained that the evidence was incontestable, he completely broke down and confessed every detail of the crime." Michael Reeves's complete confession was recorded in high-quality video and audio. David watched every second, heard every word, absorbed every detail of the revelation that finally explained what had happened to Sarah that terrible October afternoon. On the monitor screen, Reeves looked like a man completely defeated by the weight of 36 years carrying a deadly secret. His shoulders curved, his hands constantly trembling, his eyes avoiding direct contact with the camera. "I didn't plan to kill her," he said with a hoarse and broken voice. "I swear on my own mother's soul that I never planned for things to reach that point." Detective Chen was sitting on the other side of the table, professional but firm. "So tell me exactly what happened that afternoon, Michael. Tell the whole truth." Reeves took a deep breath, as if preparing to dive into deep and dark waters, and began to relate in detail the crime that had haunted Millbrook for more than 3 decades. "I was working alone in the back area of the shopping center that day. It was a Tuesday. I was doing topographical measurements to plan the installation of new sewer pipes that the city hall had contracted. It was technical work, required concentration." Continue. "I saw a woman, a very beautiful woman, coming out through the back door of the shopping center. She seemed confused, lost, was looking around as if searching for something. Did you recognize her?" "Not at the time. But later I found out it was Sarah Mitchell, nurse at the municipal hospital, married to accountant David Mitchell. Reeves made a painful pause. She approached me and asked if I knew where there was a public phone, said that the one at the pharmacy was broken, and she urgently needed to talk to her husband. David felt his stomach turn. Sarah had trusted this man, had approached him asking for innocent help, not knowing she was walking straight to her killer. "What did you tell her?" "I said there was a phone in our temporary tool shed, about 200 meters from there, on the vacant lot. It was a lie. There was no phone there at all. But I had been drinking at lunch. I had been alone for weeks on that construction site. When I saw that beautiful woman, alone, vulnerable, something bad awakened in me." David's hands closed into fists. He wanted to go through the glass and strangle Reeves with his own hands. "Did Sarah follow you to the shed?" "Yes. She trusted me completely. She was worried, said her husband would get nervous if she didn't call. She talked about him with so much love. It was obvious they were very happy together." Reeves's voice broke, which made everything even more terrible. "What happened at the tool shed?" "When we got there, when she realized there was no phone, I lost control. I tried to force kiss her. I tried to put my hands on her. I was drunk. I was lonely. I wasn't thinking straight." David closed his eyes, forcing himself to continue listening. He needed to know the whole truth, no matter how painful it was. "Sarah pushed me hard, screamed that she was going to tell her husband, that she was going to call the police, that I was a disgusting animal. She started running back toward the shopping center, screaming for help. And then I panicked completely. I ran after her. I knew that if she told someone, my life would be over. I had been arrested before for bar fights. I already had a record. No one would believe my version." Reeves stopped talking, breathing with difficulty. "Continue, Michael." "I caught her before she reached the shopping center door. I grabbed her from behind, covering her mouth with my hand to stop the screaming. She fought. God, how she fought. She was strong, determined. But I was bigger." David felt nausea rising up his throat. Sarah managed to break free for a moment and ran again, but she tripped on a pile of bricks that were on the ground. She fell head first, hit hard on a concrete edge. She started bleeding a lot, became unconscious. Was she dead? No, she was still breathing, but she was badly hurt. I could have called an ambulance. I could have invented a story about an accident. I could have saved her life. Tears began rolling down Reeves's aged face. But I was scared. I was drunk. I was thinking only of myself. So you killed her deliberately. I took a rope we used on the construction site. Sarah was semi-conscious, murmuring her husband's name, begging to go home. I finished what I had started. I strangled her until she stopped moving. The room fell into absolute silence for several seconds. And after? I dug a grave on the vacant lot. I buried her body very deep. I thought it would never be found. 2 weeks later, my supervisor assigned me to install the sewer pipes exactly in that area. It was like a gift. I covered the crime scene with concrete and metal. I thought I had committed the perfect crime. Chen leaned forward. Was her ring on her finger when you buried her? Yes. I tried to remove it, but it was too tight on her finger. I was in a hurry. I was nervous. I gave up. I thought it would never make a difference. that it would never be found. But the ring had been found, and after 36 years keeping its secrets in darkness, it had finally delivered Sarah Mitchell's killer. Why did you never confess before? Why did you carry this secret for so long? Reeves looked directly at the camera for the first time. Because I'm a coward. Because I destroyed an innocent person's life and didn't have the courage to face the consequences. Because I lived 36 years knowing I had stolen a wife from her husband, a daughter from her parents, a future from a family. 3 months later, Michael Reeves was sentenced to life imprisonment without possibility of parole. At 71 years old, he would die behind bars, finally paying for the heinous crime he had committed in 1987. The trial attracted national media attention. Reporters from across the country came to Millbrook to cover the extraordinary story of the wedding ring that had solved a murder after 4 decades of mystery. But for David, it wasn't about fame or media attention. It was exclusively about justice. It was about finally being able to bury his wife with the dignity she deserved. On December 15, 2023, exactly 36 years and 2 months after buying a headstone for an empty grave, David could finally bury Sarah Mitchell's mortal remains. The ceremony was small and deeply intimate. Only close family, some friends who had remained loyal throughout the decades, and Detective Chen, who had become more than an investigator to David, had become the person who brought Sarah back home. Reverend James Murphy, who had officiated David and Sarah's wedding 39 years before, conducted the funeral service with words of love and hope. As the coffin was slowly lowered into the earth under a blue winter sky, David gently held Sarah's ring, now clean and polished, shining exactly as on the day he had placed it on her finger during the wedding ceremony. "Forever," he whispered, repeating the words engraved in the gold. "I promised forever. And I finally kept my promise to find you and bring you home." After everyone else had left, David stayed alone beside the grave for more than an hour. He took his own wedding ring from his finger, the one he had worn faithfully for 36 years, and placed it gently on the fresh earth next to a bouquet of white roses. "Now you can rest in peace, my eternal love," he said, his voice breaking with decades of pain finally being released. "And I can learn to live again, knowing that you are finally home, and that whoever hurt you paid for what they did." As he walked slowly back to the car, David felt something he hadn't experienced in 36 years, a deep and true peace. Sometimes love transcends death and time. Sometimes a simple gold ring can speak louder than any witness or evidence. And sometimes justice arrives exactly when it needs to arrive, even if it takes decades. Sarah Mitchell was finally resting in peace. Michael Reeves would finally pay for what he had done. The Bivy circle was complete, the promise fulfilled, and a ring engraved with the words "forever" had proven that some promises are truly eternal, and that true love never gives up on finding the truth.